One of the biggest blockbuster trades in the league last year was the Porzingis trade. In this trade, the Knicks traded their injured, disgruntled star to the Mavericks in return for primarily cap space, Dennis Smith Jr., and 2 future first-round picks. A year later after the trade, the Knicks appeared to be big losers while the Mavericks appeared to be big winners. After all, the main asset that the Knicks got in return for Porzingis was cap space to sign KD and Kyrie Irving, and I don't even have to tell you how that ended up working out. The cap space was ultimately used to sign several free agents, such as Julius Randle and Bobby Portis, each of which were major duds. While the Knicks totally failed their free agency, Kristaps alongside Luka was hoping to lead the Mavericks to the 7th seed in the West. KP was even finding his all-star groove back in the bubble, averaging 30 points and almost 10 boards a game over a 6-game stretch. It definitely had to hurt Knicks fans to see KP dominate again, and at the moment, it appeared that the Porzingis trade was highway robbery. But the Mavericks may not have made out like bandits like many people think, because Porzingis suffered yet another brutal knee injury. It was reported not too long ago that Porzingis will miss the rest of the playoffs due to a torn meniscus in his right knee. This is not the first significant injury of Porzingis, and up to this point, he's had a pretty injury-riddled career. One area that wasn't really talked about too much last offseason was how risky it was for the Mavericks to max out Porzingis. They gave a 5-year, $158 million max contract to an injury-prone 7-footer. What they did was actually a huge gamble. So in this video, we're going to revisit the Porzingis trade. And by analyzing the trade, I'm going to show that the Knicks made out a lot better than most NBA fans think. But before we continue, if you like videos like this, please like and subscribe, as your support helps me to make more dope content. Now let's continue. The main reason why the Knicks made out better than most people think in this trade is due to the injury history of KP. At just the young age of 25, Porzingis has already suffered a brutal amount of leg injuries. He suffered a torn ACL, a sore Achilles, several knee issues, and now a torn meniscus. What's pretty damning about this recent injury is that it happened in a year in which the Mavericks tried to load manage Porzingis to keep him healthy. The Mavericks kept Porzingis down to just 32 minutes a game this season. He only played in 57 out of the Mavericks' 75 games this year, and he had a 3-month break between the pause of the NBA season and the start of the Orlando bubble. Despite KP's limited load, he still couldn't manage to stay healthy at the end of the year. Porzingis only played in the first 3 games of the Mavericks playoff series against the Clippers before going down with a season-ending injury. This injury-riddled season of KP could mean that Porzingis is on track to have an injury-filled career. Unfortunately for 7-footers like KP, extremely tall players often have a hard time staying healthy. There are a large amount of 7-footers throughout league history that had their careers cut short due to foot and leg injuries. Yao Ming, for example, was one of the most dominant players in the league in his prime, but he had to retire early in 2011 due to several foot injuries. Greg Oden is another 7-footer who had to stop playing early due to lower body injuries. In fact, Oden's career was so promising that he went number 1 overall, right ahead of KD in the 2007 draft. The list of 7-footers who had their careers filled with leg injuries isn't short. Here's a bunch of several other notable big men who had to deal with a large amount of lower body injuries throughout their career. This includes guys like Manute Bol, Sean Bradley, and Ralph Sampson. There actually is a science to why 7-foot tall players tend to have a hard time staying healthy. According to William McGarvey, a physician for the Houston Rockets, taller players are predisposed to foot and leg injuries because of their size. We can't know this for sure about KP, but his body type simply might not be built for the NBA grind. He's already shown an inability to shake injuries just 5 years into his short career, and players of his stature have had their careers shortened due to lower body injuries. If this is the case, then the Knicks were actually smart to move on from KP. Knowing the history of big men like KP in the league, it makes sense why the Knicks front office might have been hesitant to offer him a max contract. A max contract for Porzingis means all 5 years are guaranteed, and this could potentially mean being stuck paying $30 million a year every season to a guy who barely plays. The Knicks already learned firsthand with Stat's 5-year, $100 million contract back in 2010 why it's incredibly risky to max out an injury-prone player. This also goes to show that the Mavericks may not be the big winners of this trade that people thought. At first glance, it appeared that the Mavericks managed to land an all-star for nothing, but by maxing out KP, the Mavericks took an incredible gamble. If KP's body can't hold up, a large amount of their salary cap will be essentially wasted, which will make it a lot more difficult to build around Luka Doncic. At this point, I don't think you can blame the Knicks for not wanting to max out Porzingis, so it makes sense to trade him, but if you're going to trade him, you need to make sure you get good value in return. What did the Knicks get in return for Porzingis? The main asset that the Knicks got in return for Porzingis was cap space. By getting Hardaway and Courtney Lee off the books, the Knicks created enough cap space for 2 max salary slots, which they hope to use on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. We all know how this played out. Almost all of the Knicks' Plan B free agency pickups performed poorly this year, so it's fair to say that getting cap space back in return for KP was a major dud. The players that the Knicks got back in the trade was DSJ, Wesley Matthews, and DeAndre Jordan. The only player worth talking about here is Dennis Smith Jr., as Wesley Matthews and DeAndre Jordan both left the Knicks for nothing. Unfortunately for the Knicks, DSJ was a complete disappointment. He had a promising first 2 years of his career. He averaged about 15 and 5 both years, albeit while playing horrible defense and shooting the ball poorly, but it did earn him an all-rookie second-team honors, and there was enough flashes to get excited about his future. Unfortunately, the Knicks totally jacked up his development. The story on DSJ is that he was a good driving and finishing guard, but he needed a jumper to open up his game. Keith Smart worked with DSJ all summer long to improve his jumper, yet DSJ's outside shot somehow got even worse. In fact, DSJ was so horrible this year that he actually had the worst shooting numbers in league history, shooting 35% from the field, 30 from 3, and 50 from the free throw line. DSJ also dealt with injuries all year and the death of his stepmom, but he was still a major disappointment. It was clear from watching DSJ this year that his confidence was totally gone. Even the areas that he used to do well, such as driving to the hoop, had declined. DSJ's disaster of a season also goes to show how bad the Knicks are at player development. So it's safe to say that getting back DSJ in this trade was a complete wash. He's only got 1 year left on his contract, and then the Knicks have to decide whether to re-sign him or not. So the only real assets that the Knicks got in return for KP was the draft picks. In the trade, they got the Mavericks' unprotected first-round pick in 2021 and the Mavs' top 10 protected first-round pick in 2023. This is where the Knicks may have gotten some real value here. The Mavs are the 7th seed this year, but there's no guarantee of a playoff spot next year. Porzingis is injury prone, so it's unlikely he plays a full season, and the Mavericks won't have much cap room if Hardaway opts into his $19 million player option. You also have to factor in that the West will be tough next year. Golden State will be healthy. The Suns should be better considering that they just went 8-0 in the Orlando bubble. The Blazers will be healthy, and teams like the Kings and Pelicans should improve. This means that the Knicks could possibly get the Mavericks lottery pick in what's supposed to be a loaded draft that includes Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green. If the Knicks end up drafting a star with the Mavs lottery pick, then you can make a strong argument that the Knicks ended up on top. The Mavericks' first-round pick in 2023 will also be useful in aiding the Knicks' rebuild. All in all, I still wouldn't call the Porzingis trade a good trade for the Knicks because they didn't really get good value in return for KP. The Knicks rushed a trade with the Mavs a week before the trade deadline when there were other teams they could have negotiated with for a better deal. It would have been nice for the Knicks to have ended up with a better young player than DSJ. The Clippers had interest in KP. Imagine if the Knicks got back Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They'd be sitting pretty right now. But while they didn't get back a good young player, we still have to see what becomes of those draft picks. But in all honesty, I still would consider this trade an L for the Knicks because while they did get something for KP, until we see the Knicks actually hit on those picks, it looks like they got underwhelming value in return. This trade could end up being a lose-lose for both teams because the Knicks may miss on the Dallas picks, but at the same time, the max contract that the Mavericks gave Porzingis could end up being a terrible contract. At this point, the Porzingis trade is still a bad trade for the Knicks, but they didn't necessarily get fleeced. It's going to take years from now for us to really fairly grade this trade and see who won the deal. But after KP just suffered a significant setback with that meniscus tear, the trade doesn't look as bad for the Knicks as people thought. With that said, that's going to be the end of the video, guys. Do you agree? Did the Knicks win or lose the Porzingis trade? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this, and enjoy the rest of your day.